Speaker is Yuqi Zhang, who is currently in the first year of his PhD at Lancaster University. His current thesis title is A Heideggerian Critique of Artificial Intelligence, which will attempt to use Heidegger's critique of technology to study the representativeness of AI in the cybernetic era, to study the change of the concepts of artificial and intelligence and the artificialization of intelligence from the perspective of the history of being, Geschichte des Seins, and to inquire about the potential relation between Heidegger's releasement, Gelassenheit, and AI. His paper today is titled Seyn as Difference and Seyn as Anfang, Heidegger's two interpretations of Seyn in section 9 of On the Essence of Truth. Over to you, Yuqi.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank everybody. And I will start my presentation now. We know that since its apparent first occurrence in the second sentence of his 1932 lectures, The Beginning of Western Philosophy, Heidegger began to write Dasein with a Y as Dasein, even if the 1932 reference was a slightly later addition by 1934 in both his private notes, the Black Notebooks, and in the first of the Hölderlin lecture courses in 1934 and 1935. The use of Dasein was well established. What does Dasein signify, and how can we understand it? Almost all of the references to Dasein are in either Heidegger's lecture courses or his private notes. There are vanishingly few references to Dasein in what he published during his lifetime. Yet there is one crucial place where he explains how we can understand Dasein. In 1949, Heidegger replaced the original final section of his published lecture On the Essence of Truth with a new one. This essay was originally written as a lecture text in 1930 and went through several versions. The first publication was in 1943. And we now know it differs from the unpublished 1930 version. In the fifth edition, as a new edition published in 1949, Heidegger introduced and renamed the final section of the text, which have simply been called Anmerkung, remark, and numbered it as section 9, still subtitled Anmerkung. If we want to know what he means by Dasein, this is the place where he puts a discussion of what Dasein actually means into the public domain for the first time. Indeed, this is almost the only place where he ever gives us such a clear explanation. How does he introduce Dasein to us in this section 9? In fact, he does it twice. Initially, he said something surprising. He seems to suggest that Dasein, the difference between Seinde and Sein, can be understood remaining within the representation of metaphysics. There is a puzzle here, because we might be tempted to presume that Dasein refers to an understanding of being that is outside the metaphysical. How is it that the first time in this new section 9, where he presents an explanation of Dasein, remaining within the representation of metaphysics, what does he actually say? So let me first briefly introduce the new section 9 and what is said in it. The new section, in fact, distinguishes between two interpretations of Dasein. Firstly, Seyn as the Waltenden, prevailing difference between what and what, between Seinde and Sein. And secondly, Seyn Escheid Empfängliche appears inceptually as a Lichtendes Bergen, an enlightening, illuminating, or clearing, sheltering. He says the name of this clearing is Aletheia. When Heidegger explains Dasein as the difference between Seinde and Sein, he does so through his critique of the traditional metaphysical concept of truth. And this is where the new section begins by placing it into the here, the term from the essence of truth to the truth of essence. This is what the new section 9 actually says. Within this thinking of metaphysics, Truth is considered as correspondence, while essence is defined as the whatness, quintitas, or the reality, realitas, the metaphysical determination of things. The essence of truth can be transformed into the questions of how truth essences. In an interpretation following traditional metaphysics, this answer is self-evident: correspondence of the intellect and the thing. However, as Heidegger states On the Essence of Thought, quote, "Unanimity as such does not primarily make Dasein accessible," end quote. This means that the possibility of correspondence has to be grounded in a more primordial presupposition that things can present themselves as what they are, that is, in their presence. The essence of truth thus relates to the essence as Sein. Truth as correspondence can occur only on the basis how what is present as a whole. The Seiende im Ganzen, or simply that Seiende as that Seiende is disclosed. To disclose is to let present. To let presence is present thing. The present thing of what is present is a Lichtender's Bergen, a clearing sheltering, which is aletheia. What do we mean when we speak of das Seiende, Sein and Seiendes or Einseiendes here? English Heidegger scholarship typically translates Sein as being, while das Seiende and Seiendes or Einseiendes are rendered as beings or a being, depending on the context. While I'm going to follow the convention of translating Sein as being, the other two translations are worth questioning. As Heidegger suggests in his 1932 lectures, das Seiende, as a translation of the Greek terms toon and even the plural ta onta, nevertheless designates something singular as the singular unity of what is present, namely that it is present in its presence. Das Seiende im Ganzen, das Seiende as a whole. Thus, I'm going to call das Seiende the presently present. When we say Seiendes is a being, what do we mean by it? Do we mean by a being this object here? Or do we mean at the moment when it is thing that is present, presently, i.e. present here, now, to us, in which it can be taken to be a thing? Suddenly, instead of just focusing on this object, we have brought into play the totality of the field of its being present, the presently present as a whole in which it can occur. Whereas the modern mind, everything is just objective stuff. In fact, we cannot even perceive an object unless we are already taking account of the unity within which the object, namely this thing, geschieht, occurs, happens, or is. Therefore, we can say that Heidegger always gives Seiendes a wider reference than a mere object. When he speaks of objects, he prefers to speak of die Dinge, things, rather than die Seienden, beings. In fact, he almost never speaks of die Seienden because he wants to draw our attention to the presently present in which a thing occurs, and not to focus on the objectness of what we have come to think of as beings, even though the Seiende itself, in fact, could refer to taonta, the neuter plural of toon, which doesn't signify a plurality as a numerical multiplicity of individual beings, but the singular unity of as the manifold as the presently present. After the clarification of the meanings of das Seiende and Seiendes, we can understand what happens in Heidegger's interpretation of Zen as the prevailing difference. If Vartet prevails, as the between of Seinders and Seyn, that Seinder and Seyn. The disclosure of the presently present as the essence of truth is no longer a static determination, but an unfolding in which being, while revealing and disclosing the presently present, conceals itself in its sheltering. Here lies the reason why Heidegger asks us to think of the word Wesen, essence, verbally. Wesen here no longer means the whatness or the reality, but the unfolding, and its third-person singular present verbal form, West, is very properly translated as unfolds. The unfolding is the differentiation of the difference between Seinder and Seyn. Thus, it's that Seyn that has the basic relation as enlightening shelter, the originary meaning of truth, aletheia. Therefore, the unfolding interrelation of Seyn, Seinder, and Seyn as the prevailing difference between the two constitutes the truth of essence. It is a more originary correspondent in the manner of letting unfold, thereby becoming the source of the essence of truth as correspondence. Such an interpretation appears viable and captures the thought Heidegger has long sought to express. Why does Heidegger provide us with not one, but simply two ways of understanding the Seyn in the new section 9? Because it is possible, even with the language of metaphysics, to begin to see how that Seyn is the prevailing difference between that Seinder, what is presently present, and that Seyn, being, namely the disclosure of what is presently present, and so being as present thing. What Heidegger really means is that Seyn as difference is not metaphysical itself, but a mode of interpretation for those who remain in the tradition of metaphysics and think metaphysically. This is illustrated in a note by Heidegger in the margin of his old copy of his essay on the essence of ground. Quote, transcendence lies in differentiation. This is the carrying through of difference. Here is a preparation for a wholly other inception. Everything still mixed and confusing, forced into phenomenological, existential, and transcendental investigation. The happening not as a leap. And what of this? Eventuate in the event, end quote. Seyn as difference is precisely what he described as the Ausschlag, the carrying through of difference. This German word originally means a state of settlement achieved through an unfolding. Heidegger used it as a description of the settled and deposited tripartite distinction of Seyn, Seyn, and Seinder in Seyn as the prevailing difference. But it is not an ultimate result of thinking, but only a preparation for the future, a wholly other exception. So why should we begin with Seyn as the prevailing difference for those of us accustomed to metaphysical thinking? We can once again attempt to listen to what Heidegger means when he speaks of metaphysical representation. Metaphysics, that's the history of being from Plato to Nietzsche, revealing itself as a mode of being distinct from das vorhandene Seinder, the present at hand present. It represents the beingness of the presently present in a twofold manner, namely, in terms of universality and the highest. Under metaphysical representation, being as Seinheit, beingness, is not only distinguished from the present at hand present, but also given priority over it. One could say that metaphysics itself demands a difference that carries a hierarchical distinction. When Heidegger attempts to explain Seyn as the difference between Seinde and Sein, he follows the past metaphysical tendency to form a simply hierarchical and even tripartite structure in order to make it easier for contemporary thinker. But he also demonstrates its provisional nature, preparing for the appearance of the future thinkers who are capable to understand the more originary interpretation, Seyn as Anfängliche, inceptual, and so as Anfang itself. Seyn as Anfang is interpreted by Heidegger on the final three sentences of section 9. He once again addresses the answer to the essence of truth. In the previous discussion, he has already explained that this answer relates to Seyn as difference. But now, he no longer considers this answer to be within the representation of metaphysics. Instead, it is the saying of a term within the history of Dasein. Seyn here is no longer the difference between Seinde and Sein, but Seyn as Anfang, revealing inceptively in the light of a concealing withdrawing relation. Anfang is a translation of the ancient Greek word arche, understood as initial disposition and disposing departure. That Seyn is arche because, as the enlightening sheltering, truth in the name of aletheia, unconcealment out of concealment, heat, gehört zu, and so belongs to gehört to it. Here, we can observe the unfolding grounding interplay happening in Seyn as Anfang. Thus Seyn unfolds itself in an originary and prevailing manner, but its unfolding is necessarily accompanied by a certain mode of grounding out of concealment. Heidegger's description of Seyn as Anfang is extremely difficult to understand, because even at the time, the number of people who had understood Heidegger's word well enough to know what he was saying was vanishingly small. Yet, we can still briefly tell two differences between Seyn as difference and Seyn as Anfang. Firstly, from the perspective of the history of being, unlike Seyn as difference, as a product of overcoming metaphysics within the tradition of metaphysics, Seyn as Anfang occurs constantly, whether in the first exception as metaphysics or as the other exception. Even in the present era, in das Gestier, the gathering positing within which the essence of technology dominates, that Seyn prevails. Secondly, Seyn as Anfang doesn't require a tripartite structure where difference happens, as we have seen in Seyn as the prevailing difference. It is unity as such, and thus no longer needs to remain within the representation of metaphysics. The clarification of the difference between these two interpretations of Dasein appears to offer the groundwork for a new queer narrative. This becomes all the more significant when we consider that Heidegger talks about the turn in his reflection on Seyn as Anfang. It can be unfolded like this. Whereas earlier, Heidegger had focused on the ontological difference, the Heidegger of 1949 retrospectively set aside the limitation of his earlier thought by deploying a more original understanding of being, Seyn as Anfang, Lichten, to illuminate or disclose his earlier thinking. However, the confrontation of the two interpretations of Dasein constructs with Heidegger's own statement. If we note again the year 1949, in the third edition in Introduction to On the Essence of Ground, Heidegger explicitly states that these two interpretations of Dasein are the same, as mentioned by Aaron earlier. That, quote, that nothing, not of the nothing, and this nothing not of the difference are indeed not identical, yet they are the same in the sense of what belongs together in the essence or unfolding of the being of the presently present. End note. The latter refers to Seyn as difference, while the former as the not of the nothing, that is, quote, experience from the perspective of the presently present, end quote, speaks of the unfolding grounding nature of Seyn as Anfang, as the not of being as nothing, perpetually withdrawing while being the presently present and simultaneously concealing itself. But how can the same things become distinctive? One possible answer appears when we follow Heidegger's statement to think through the unfolding of the being of the presently present, namely, Seyn as difference in the new section 9. Seyn as Anfang is the more original thinking of Seyn as difference, which means that there isn't Seyn as difference as such. Its tripartite structure will withdraw into the unity of Seyn as Anfang. In the unfolding of Seyn as difference, the presently present must be through the nothing in nothing. Being must persistently withdraw in favor of letting the presently present be. Their difference is an identical non-difference. However, such an answer does not really fit with Heidegger's statement. If Seyn as Anfang is merely a result of Seyn as difference, why is it a more originary and inceptual understanding? In the course of such an analysis, is it not Seyn as difference that is more prior and originary, so that Seyn as Anfang can be derived from it? In fact, when Heidegger presents Seyn as Anfang as the more original understanding, he does not refer to the priority in a chain of inference. Rather, he wants to lead us to understand the fact that Seyn as Anfang makes Seyn as difference possible. In the original meaning of Ahe, we can discern a profound infinity with Hen, the outstanding description used by Parmenides to explain being itself. As early as 1924, in his interpretation of Aristotle, Heidegger pointed out that Aristotle perceives the equivalence between Ahe and Hen. Aristotle, in his description of being, posits the task in the following way, quote, to find a manifoldness of Ahe or a structure of Hen, end quote. According to Aristotle, Hen, as a name of being, belongs to the Eleatics, although their understanding remains suke humenos, i.e., in a blended way. So what does Hen, the outstanding predicate of being in the school of Parmenides, mean? If we resort to this dictionary, it will tell us that Hen is the neutral singular of Hes, one, the number, or the unity. In the common usage of the unity, everyone thinks it is a thing as the empty one, standing opposed to all multiplicity and manifoldness. This is a point made by Socrates in Plato's dialogue Parmenides, when he mocked Zeno's defense of the Hen by challenging its logical consistency when measured against multiplicity. Aristotle considers Parmenides' Hen in a blended way for the same reason. In his metaphysics, he notes that although Parmenides insists on the Hen, Parmenides in a certain sense acknowledges two causes, and so forgetting how to expand the appearance of the multiplicity. Plato and Aristotle, and even all subsequent philosophers, misunderstand Parmenides. In being as Hen, Parmenides wants us to see that being is a unifying power, letting what the manifold be shown up in the unifying unity that being is. In short, Hen is the unifying unity, in which the unifying itself of difference itself is what the unifying unity is, how unity unfolds. We hear is here, not capulatively as in does S is P, but as being. The difference in being does not destroy the unity, but forms it, and so lets it appear in its full essence as the unifying. This can be seen in Parmenides' fragment A, where he puts Hen all together with Pan and Sunihes as a determiner. Pan can be used as all, each, for the plural nouns, and also as whole for the singular ones. Accordingly, its two substantive uses, topan and tapanta, actually have the same meaning as toon and toonta, as I discussed earlier. They all mean the singular presently present as a whole, an azumao, all at once. The differences in all Zander are not only unified by the unifying unity, Hen, but is itself the self-unifying unity as Hen, which demonstrates here the role of Sunihes, gathering itself from itself, holding itself all together, full of presentness, as suggested by Heidegger in Introduction to Metaphysics. Only then, from the perspective of the unifying unity, can we understand what happens in the sameness and difference of the two modes of interpretations of Dasein. As we follow the thinking of Seyn as difference and arrive at Seyn as Anfang, we come to see that the dissolution of Seyn as the prevailing difference does not result from a transformation that occurs within it. It is not something that needs to be overcome. Rather, the difference inherent within it reveals itself as a sameness, that is, Seyn as Anfang, or Seyn as the unifying unity, where the Seyn gathers into itself as the unifying unity that being is. This will also help us to interpret the two differences between the two interpretations of Dasein offered in the new section 9. Dasein names the gathering in differentiation of the prevailing difference between Zander and Sein, and why in Dasein itself, in the history of being, or the tradition of metaphysics, is gathered in its most fundamental meaning, Anfang, Ahe. We can finally return to the earlier remark about the leap and the event written in the margin note of Heidegger's own copy of On the Essence of Ground. Heidegger's denial of the leap, the happening not as a leap, is a rejection of a transformation that remains external or oppositional to what precedes it, as if metaphysics and its overcoming were two distinct realms. What happens in this so-called leap is Ereignen, eventuation in the event. It is not a happening of thing, but the eventuation that lets what belongs as difference come into its own as the unifying, suggested in the epistemological explanation of the word Ereignen. Air as Latin and eignen as to own. This enigmatic term, des Ereignis, which Heidegger deploys especially in his contributions to philosophy, now reveals its meaning. Thus, Ereignis is nothing other than Dasein, as the unity in its unifying, the unifying unity. Thank you.
Thank you very much.